You are tuned to CFTO TV Channel 9 in Toronto, Cable 8.
The CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
Good evening. Brian Peckford and his Newfoundland Conservatives racked up another big election victory tonight. It was their third in 6 years, but their performance wasn't as impressive this time out. Premier Peckford will be back with a reduced majority, 36 of the 52 seats in the House of Assembly. That's down 9 from the number at dissolution. The Liberals, led by Leo Barry, made some impressive gains, but didn't do as well as had hoped. They picked up 9 seats for a new total of 15. The New Democrats retained their 1 seat under their new leader, Peter Fenwick, but the NDP scored an impressive gain in popular vote. This was credited to the constant campaigning of popular union leader Richard Cashin. Despite the Tory triumph, it was a gloomy night for 4 members of the Peckford cabinet. They went down to personal defeat. In his victory address, Peckford said agreements with Ottawa in mining, fishing and forestry and the Atlantic Energy Accord put the province on the road to a brighter economic future. The Newfoundland election brought Roger Simmons back from the political wilderness tonight. The former federal energy mines minister won a seat for the Liberals. Ms. Simmons had resigned just 10 days after Pierre Trudeau named him to the cabinet in 1983. He was later convicted of income tax evasion. Simmons remained in the Commons but was defeated in last September's federal election. The first day of the Constitutional Conference ended today with 5 provinces supporting Prime Minister Brian Mulroney in his bid to give native rights to the people, native peoples the right to self-government. The 5 are Ontario, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Prince Edward Island. Mulroney has 1 more day to get 2 more provinces and gain a majority of the population. Bob Evans reports.
The Prime Minister waded right into his first constitutional conference, establishing the good-natured mood he hopes will end in agreement. But once his new ceremonial gavel fell, the opposing points of view became apparent. First, the native people.
The First Nations have an inherent and distinct right to self-government.
We must achieve an amendment on the right of self-government, or this conference will have failed.
The federal government proposes an accord which would recognize and confirm Aboriginal self-government and commit Ottawa and the provinces to negotiations leading to agreements. And that is where some provinces draw the line. Nova Scotia is uncertain. Saskatchewan wants to go slow.
That there should be a greater degree of consensus about the meaning and implications of Aboriginal self-government before it is cast in stone.
And Alberta and British Columbia don't want to go that way at all. BC's Attorney General thinks self-government will lead to land claims.
The consequences of that on the Treasury of Canada will be very major and very horrendous.
That brought a sharp response.
Because you know and I know that the taxpayers aren't going to go broke if there's a land claim settlement for Indian people in British Columbia. All we're asking for is our rightful share in this country. And it's people like Mr. Bennett who are going to have to give up some of that land because it rightfully belonged to us to begin with and shouldn't be used as a scare tactic so that we can't have Indian self-government in this country.
But the Mulroney-sponsored air of good humor prevailed with this final plea to the Western premiers to change their minds.
My gollies, you fellas will go down in history of accomplishing something in your lives.
There's the public conference here in the open, but the real meeting is going on upstairs in a committee room in private. The premiers are not there, but their advisors and experts are, looking for that common ground the Prime Minister has told them to find. And that's where the real arm twisting is going on. Bob Evans, CTV News, Ottawa.
There was unusual accord and speed in the Commons today as all 3 parties joined to pass a bill and plug a legal loophole. The loophole in the customs laws could be used to import pornographic and hate literature. The bill will become law before the weekend. It became necessary after a federal court ruling in Vancouver last month. Pamela Wallen reports.
The government was forced to move when a federal court judge ruled that existing customs laws regarding pornography were vague and in violation of the Charter of Rights.
And what we're doing now is putting provisions in place which satisfy the concerns of the court, namely that they need be explicit as opposed to vague.
The old law prohibited the importation of material considered immoral or indecent, but the judge said that was ill-defined. The new law now replaces the phrase immoral and indecent with the word obscene. Under the criminal code, that's defined to include material that exhibits undue sexual exploitation or sex that involves crime, horror, cruelty, or violence. Hate literature, material that advocates genocide or hatred against an identifiable ethnic or religious group, will also be banned, as will material classed as seditious or treasonous. As much as 90% of so-called pornographic material available in Canada is imported, despite more than 5,000 seizures by border customs officers each year. Its resale value is estimated at $20,000 a day, and that doesn't account for videos that are so easily copied and sold. The new law simply puts us back where we were before the Vancouver judge's ruling. Then, as now, much is left to the discretion of individual customs officers to make judgments on what is pornographic or obscene and therefore illegal. But the government has promised to revamp the whole system, and soon. For guidance, it's looking to the final report of the Fraser Committee on Pornography, and that's due later this month. Pamela Wallen, CTV News, Ottawa.
The federal government is going to sell off more than $50 million worth of property. Public Works Minister Roch LaSalle says the government doesn't need the property, but this will not be a fire sale. There are office towers and vacant land in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, and even the old BC Penitentiary in New Westminster. Provinces and cities are already making offers, and if all goes well, another $100 million in property may go on the auction block later. A full-scale police alert remained in effect today as Toronto's sprawling transit system coped with a terrorist bomb threat. However, the threat wasn't taken as seriously by thousands of commuters who returned to the subways and buses following Monday's alarm. Peter Murphy reports.
Police were out again in force patrolling Toronto's transit system. The bomb squad was busy all day dealing with suspicious items, but found no explosives. The emergency has resulted in a rash of crank calls. So far, the police have arrested and charged 4 people with public mischief. Police officials will not say how long the security alert will continue. Much depends on the success of the police intelligence efforts in tracking down the people who made the threat.
Well, until the intelligence tell us that the threat is over, and at this moment we're still in that full alert.
Tension has eased in Toronto. People have returned to riding the transit system, and rush hour is back to normal.
Yesterday would have been a silly chance to take the subway, but you can't go on living in fear forever. So you have to take your chances somewhere along the line.
A little more relaxed, but there's the apprehension.
Over the week, the uniformed police presence on the transit system will be slowly diminished. But police surveillance will continue using plainclothes officers. Peter Murphy, CTV News, Toronto.
Troubled East-West relations are expected to dominate discussions tomorrow when External Affairs Minister Joe Clark meets with his Soviet counterpart Andrei Gromyko. Clark arrived in Moscow today, the 3rd stop on his 8-day Soviet visit. The Soviet foreign minister was on hand to greet Clark. Gromyko expressed hope for improved trade relations. However, Clark cautioned that a long list of bilateral issues must be resolved first. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has formally accepted an invitation to meet with U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Their first summit meeting is expected later this year. The White House confirmed today it has received a letter from the new Soviet leader in which Gorbachev agrees in principle to hold talks without specifying the time or the place. The U.S. invitation was conveyed by Vice President George Bush when he arrived for last month's funeral of former Soviet leader Konstantin Chernenko. Reagan said today he was pleased with the Soviet response. The United States contends that Soviet Star Wars technology is catching up rapidly with the Americans. A report released today by the U.S. Pentagon suggests that Soviet space weaponry could equal the knockout capability of America's weapons within about 10 years. The report says Star Wars technology is just one of several new entries in the catalog of Soviet weaponry. David Martin reports.
Defense Secretary Weinberger today unveiled his annual catalog of Soviet military power, detailing what he called the increasingly ambitious Soviet buildup, even in high-tech Star Wars weapons where American technology is considered superior. According to Weinberger, much of the technology that goes into Russian weapons is copied from the West.
And many of you will recognize a very familiar-looking sight as you look at this MiG-29 Fulcrum, because it is, of course, very similar to American fighter planes.
Pentagon officials say the Russians obtained classified American documents on radars for the F-15 fighter and the B-1 bomber. Classified Soviet documents published by a French newspaper claim that stolen technology helped speed development of several of the Soviet Union's frontline warplanes. Sometimes, however, Russian imitations appear mindless. The Navy's F-4 fighter has one feature specifically designed for carrier operations. The same feature shows up on the MiG-23, even though the Soviets do not have a single aircraft carrier for the MiG-23 to land on.
Secretary Weinberger says he needs a larger budget to correct critical deficiencies in the military balance. But the degree to which the Soviets are driven to copy American technology suggests that they have some critical deficiencies of their own. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
U.S. officials said